if you guys will all indulge me, this is my opportunity to thank so many people on the team, so I'm just going to try to do that as quickly as I can. I am fortunate I get to work with the best group of talented and determined filmmakers. Motto Pictures, my dear friends Julie Goldman, Carolyn Hepburn, Chris Clements, Marissa Erickson, Daniel Torres, and Samantha Bloom, who do so much behind the scenes and wear so many hats, I can't even begin to list them all here, but they are crucial to my success as a filmmaker. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. In the edit room where so much of this work takes place, and editors deserve so much credit in general for the kind of the work that they do to make us who get up here look good. They're wonderful. I'm just going to list Anne and Adam and AJ and Marcus and Julie patiently and tenaciously wrestled this footage into a powerful narrative with me. So thank you guys so much for that. Nathan Halpern, our second time collaborating with this marvelous composer. Thank you so much, Nathan. Frank Rich, I don't know if Frank's here, I didn't see him yet, but Frank, are you there, Frank?
He's in the back.
Our champion and chief encouragement officer who worked his numerous contacts always help us find the right people. Thank you, Frank, so much. I want to also add that Lois Romano, who's so marvelous in the film, also found those tapes and her original reporter's notebook, which were so amazing, amazing artifacts to find. So thank you, Lois. I'm going. My partner in the field and beloved friend, cinematographer Dan Gold, my dear, and his assistant camera and drone operator, the awesome Todd Leatherman, who's here. And our subjects, most of you are here today. Thank you for trusting me with your stories. I'm grateful beyond words for your contributions, and you're all so wonderful in the film. And finally, my family, my kids. Julian is here, my son, and my daughter, Dylan. Really, I want them to live in a world with fewer Roy Cohns and no Donald Trumps. My brother and sister-in-law, my aunts and uncle, my cousins. We are a small but powerful tribe, you guys. I love you guys. And Thomas, I feel like I'm accepting an Oscar. This is my chance, right? And Thomas, my husband, who makes my work a priority in our lives. I love you so much. And then this guy sitting right next to me here. Yes. And then there's my dad, my dear dad, who's not only at the heart of this film, but a person who represents the very best of humanity. All right, I'm not gonna. My mother died during the course of making this film, which has been devastating for us all. I dedicated the film to her, not because she was a fan of Cohn, and it felt a little weird, but because of her belief that we would prevail over hatred and bigotry, and her belief in me. Her admiration for storytellers who pursue the truth remained strong even as the Trump era frightened and enraged her. So thank you, Dad and Mom. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, thank you all for indulging me. Okay.
All right, that was terrific. Thank you.
You.
Maybe I could start with Michael and ask, what does it feel like to see this kind of film out? You've seen this before? Is this?
I've not seen this version, but I've seen a number of versions. And I have to add that my darling Annie got to see one of the versions too, she was so proud of Ivy.
My dad actually watched numerous iterations of the film with me, and was fairly good at giving notes, but mostly like, it's wonderful, and that's it.
That's
Which is always a good note, yeah.
Exactly. Keep it going.
I'll just say one thing, as somebody just viewing the film, there are a couple of points in there which are really, really significant. Like when Peter Manso says he's evil, but that's not the whole story. I think that's the beauty of Ivy's film. She really has, by doing the Provincetown stuff and doing the Studio 54 stuff and Cohn's role in creating Donald Trump. It's a wonderful piece of history.
I want to ask the producers who are here the question about just the process of getting the funding, getting it put up. What was that like, and how long have you all been working to get the film made?
Well, we've been talking to Ivy about it every summer in Cape Cod. Somehow it comes up when we see each other for a traditional brunch for years. And then as things changed in the world around us, it seemed much more urgent, as you were saying at the beginning, to really make this film. And your first film had been with HBO, Heir to an Execution, and we really felt like that was the best and most obvious and wonderful home for the film. So we went and we pitched it to Nancy Abraham, and she and Lisa Heller greenlit the film. And it's very rare to say this, but then we went and made the film. I mean, it's so much of our time is spent putting together, like dollars, and in this case, we were able to really have the freedom to go and then make the film.
And Nancy is here now, so I can thank her properly. Thank you, Nancy. I thanked you guys at the beginning, but HBO is essential to this.
You're telling the story of a very public figure, but from your own personal perspective. How did you start thinking about what you wanted to say and do, and did you always think of it as his story, a kind of biography, but told through your lens, or how does this measure to what you had originally thought?
Well, I mean, I always thought of it as a kind of an impressionistic biography, which something I just made up. I don't know what that actually, but that it was always going to be filtered. We weren't going to try to cover his whole life from cradle to grave, kind of, hit all the high notes. So that was a challenge because we had to pick the areas of his life that I found interesting, that we all found interesting, and that we got really good, compelling material to support. But I always knew the family story would be one thread, but I always resist. It's a funny thing that I resisted. I don't want it to be just that, because that's actually just how he started his career. So yes, he pops up again in the late 70s and early 80s when he's kind of hounding my uncle and my dad as they're, coming out as the Rosenberg sons and working to clear their parents' names. So Cohn appears there, but there was so much more. So that was a really hard balance. But I said that for me, I became really interested in him starting in 1988 when we went to the AIDS quilt. Yeah. I mean, I knew about him, but I had made Heir to an Execution. I kind of done that story, and I didn't necessarily only want to revisit that. So for me, he became a fascinating figure when I realized that he was gay and that he had died of AIDS, but yet protested the whole way till the end. So that made him a really complicated and more fascinating figure to me.
Mike, in looking at this footage of that time in 1973 when you're first revealing yourself to the world, what is that like to see that in retrospect? How did you feel then? How do you feel now in terms of the impact of you coming out and what that meant in terms of the story of your family?
Well, I think the interview that Ivy did with me relatively recently says it, because in the 1970s, we really felt we were sticking it to the government. And we forced the FBI to disgorge a lot of papers that they didn't want to disgorge. We were able to make our case to the public. And I thought really good about it. It just felt fabulous because it was the time of, getting back at them for what they had done to us, but also making a more broad political point. We were using the Freedom of Information Act. We were exposing the criminality on the part of judicial people like Cohn, et cetera. And as Alan Dershowitz says in there, I mean, you can frame guilty people, and when you do that, you sometimes get innocent people involved, and that was the whole point about my mother. We now know that the government actually knew she was innocent. She didn't have a code name, and they had the documents in front of them, and they framed her to force Julius to talk. They took a hostage. They put a gun to her head, and they killed the hostage. And the whole world knows that, even though I'm afraid to say most Americans have forgotten it.
Talk a little bit about the through line to our current situation and how that affected the making of the film and maybe some of the choices that you made.
Well,
I called it the current situation. I didn't really know how to express that.
The situation that shall not be named. Well, I mean, like I said briefly when I introduced the film, I mean, for me, Donald Trump getting elected made me say, okay, now I really need to I want to do something. I want to channel how I feel about this in my work, and this seemed like the right thing to do since I'd already been thinking about it for so long. But we also didn't want to put too fine a point on it. I mean, like I do honestly think it's a little overstated that Cohn created Trump. I think like there's many people who created Trump, and Trump is a whole world unto himself. But it was very important to kind of pinpoint. And I have to say, with Anne, my editor's amazing research, we really felt like we discovered the moment that he started thinking of himself as more than this, rich, real estate tycoon and gadfly around New York. And so to me, that was like, okay, that's something we can contribute. That's new. That's not really people don't know much about. And that's when he started being connected to Russia. And now we know what's happened and where we are now. So it was very important that be a part of the story, but it always had to be through Cohn. Always had to be, that's what we constantly said in the edit room and in the process, that anytime we started to veer in one direction, which happens a lot, you follow these threads, that if we didn't get back to Cohn soon, then it wasn't worth having. But I have to say, one of the most gratifying things about where we landed with the film, and I didn't know we would at the beginning, was that there is someone worse in the world than Roy Cohn, and his name is Donald Trump.
And we're going to take some questions in a minute, but I just want to ask one last question of you, Ivy. What is the thing that surprised you the most? What did you discover, or did you discover anything that you didn't know before?
Oh boy. Well, I didn't know anything about the Richard DuPont story. I mean, just to be very specific about the film. I mean, Richard DuPont and his campaign to out Cohn really fascinated all of us. I mean, and the fact that, we got, it was John Klotz, the wonderful John Klotz, who passed away while we were making the film. He had the tapes of Cohn and DuPont on the phone. And then, Peter Manso had the magazine. That's how we first found it, was that Peter Manso in this box of materials that we were going through had the Now East magazines. And to me, that was just one of as a documentary filmmaker, you find something like that, and then you follow the thread, and you find out about this character, and you find out that Cohn was running scared, and it was very gratifying.
You did a wonderful job towards your family, your grandparents, and your father.
Thank
and I had a wonderful pleasure back 20 years ago bringing you to, I believe, to Pittsburgh to speak on anti-death penalty campaign for Amnesty International 20-some years ago. And I just want one little quick thing. I had an experience being dragged with my professor who was writing a book on ultra history at the time in the early 80s, going to interview Roy Cohn. So I was in his office with him. One, I didn't know if I was in the presence of evil, but I was certainly felt in the presence of an asshole. And the weirdest thing is, he tried to shake my hand. I sort of tried to find a way to get out of it. The only thing is, like, for a lawyer's office, he had the most plush teddy bears on all four corners of his office. It was the most teddy bears I had ever seen in any lawyer's office. My question basically is...
Specifically frogs, right?
Yes.
He liked frogs.
He liked frogs. My question basically is, what do you think of the country, what do you say about, as an American, that somebody that could be Roy Cohn's protege with his vulgarity could get into office like that? What does it say about us as Americans, our political system? And have you seen the rival Matt Turnell's documentary also about Roy Cohn that just came out in film form?
We like to think of that as a complimentary film.
Well, okay, so I mean, that's a big question about, I don't know if you want to say that, but this is, I would say, I mean, I think we're a very uneducated country. I think that's one of the biggest problems, and the conservatives started that a long time ago by cutting public education and making it incredibly, so that people, I mean, this is a longer conversation, obviously, but I think people are, the less they know, the less they learn about other cultures and other people and read or whatever, all the things that Donald Trump doesn't do, the more likely they are to be manipulated by someone who's going to take advantage of their ignorance. And that's why I think in part we have someone like Donald Trump. And as for the other film, you know, all I'll say is that we only share one subject, David Marcus, the wonderful cousin who's in our film right there. And I feel pretty proud about that, you know, that we've distinguished ourselves from that film. They cover a lot of parts of Cohn's story that we don't, and I like ours. I'll leave it at that.
But actually, can I just add, though, I think what's interesting is that I think as a nation we're impressed by confidence. And I think Donald Trump exudes confidence. And I think Roy Cohn did, too. The difference between the two men came through, I think, in Peter Manso's tapes, where Roy Cohn did have a devastating intellect. He was unscrupulous, but he knew how to really, if he's going to break the law, he knew how to do it. Whereas I don't think Donald Trump actually understands. He sees himself as having full power now. And so we
shall see.
We shall see. But I think we were seduced by his confidence. I think that the nation looked at him and said, and I don't think that he's paid back what he promised to do. And I think that that's probably the biggest fault is he's not as intelligent as the person who was his mentor.
And there's David Marcus
So
now.
I get to say, Ivy, this blew me away. It's an amazing film, and I want my college-age kids to watch it again and again and again. It's so important. But when I met you, I wondered what you'd use and what you didn't use. So if you had another 8, 9, 10 minutes, what would you have used? Because there's so much rich stuff here. I'm dying to know what you couldn't accommodate.
From just our interview?
No, it's not about mine. What
I'm
about
teasing,
Roy's
I'm
life?
teasing. I
What
know.
about
What
Roy's
about
life?
Roy's life? Whoa. Oh, man. Help me. Remind me, guys. What else? Okay, well, we...
Think about all the cuts that we had,
I
actually,
know,
Ivy. We had so
we have
many
so
different...
many.
It took a long time for it to gel.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, we probably would have gone more into maybe his personal life, but at that also, I don't know how to answer the question. I'm lost.
I mean, there was also like the early, the McCarthy stuff and the Shine, and it felt like what we did was the right amount. You could always put more of that in the film. It's just, and we had cuts with longer versions of that, but we felt like we were also trying to kind of get to where he went.
And the
ultimately.
objective, I think, from the very beginning was you said, I want to understand his character.
Yeah, well,
And I think that's what we were going for. I
maybe
think.
some of there's so much more really amazing audio, David, that it was like, I mean, for instance, there's these stories of Cohn, being flown alone on a 747 to Europe for one meeting and then flying back, and there's in his own voice telling these stories. I would have loved to use a lot more of that, honestly, because there's only so much of that we could do.
I want to thank Ivy and thank everyone here for allowing
Thank you
us to
all
be
for
the
being
place
here.
that we premiere.
Thank you.